Have you ever felt like the more you try to be kind, the more people seem to walk all over you? You show up with a good heart, offering your time, your help, and your understanding, thinking that if you keep doing the right thing, others will notice and treat you with the same care. You listen when others talk, even when you're tired. You smile when you're hurting. You stay quiet just to keep the peace, even if your silence feels like a weight pressing down on your chest. You go out of your way to be there for people, but when you need someone, it feels like no one's around. And at some point, maybe in the middle of a quiet evening, or after another apology you didn't know, you start to wonder if being kind is even worth it. You look back and realize that the people who took the most from you were the ones you gave the most to. You thought that giving would make them love you more, or that forgiving would bring them closer, but instead, you felt smaller. You hoped that if you just kept being good, something would change. But instead, you were the one left hurt, confused, and alone. It doesn't make sense at first. After all, isn't kindness supposed to make life better? Isn't it supposed to bring people together, to open hearts and build trust? But the truth doesn't always match what we're told. You start to notice that the loudest people, the ones who speak their minds without worrying about how others feel, seem to be respected more. People listen to them. People take them seriously. They don't second-guess themselves. They walk into a room and claim space, while you're still standing at the edge, hoping someone invites you in. And slowly, something inside you begins to ache, because you've spent so much of your life trying to be kind, but now you feel invisible. You wonder if kindness is the reason you've been hurt, not once or twice, but again and again. You wonder if people take advantage of your goodness because they think you won't fight back. And you start to ask questions you never dared to ask before. What if kindness, without strength, just looks like weakness to others? What if being nice isn't enough to keep you safe? What if people don't respect those who always say yes, who never get angry, who never push back? You're not angry at the world. You're just tired of pretending that everything is okay when it's not. You're tired of giving so much of yourself, only to feel empty in return. You want to keep your heart open, but you don't want it to be broken over and over again. There is something inside you that knows this isn't how it should be, and you're not alone in feeling this. The writer Robert Greene has spent his life studying people, power, and how relationships really work. He says that many people confuse kindness with weakness, and that if you don't know how the world really works, your good heart can become a target. You never meant to play a game. You just wanted to connect. But the truth is, a lot of people are playing games, even if they don't say so. They notice what they can take. They pay attention to who gives in. And if you don't know what they see in you, they might see a chance to take advantage. That's not because you're bad. It's because the world is more complex than you were told. There are people who use kindness, not because they hate it, but because they've learned they can. This is hard to hear, especially if you've spent your whole life trying to be good. But this moment right now, the one where you're starting to see things clearly, might be the most important moment of all. Because before you can change anything, you have to ask yourself a question that most people are too afraid to face. What if the reason you keep getting hurt isn't because you're too kind, but because you've never learned how to protect that kindness? And what would your life look like if your kindness had power behind it? We're going to step into that question, not with fear, but with courage. And as you begin to see things in a new light, you may never go back to the old way of being again. There is something deep inside you that always believed kindness was enough. You thought that if you were generous with your time, patient with people's moods, and forgiving when they made mistakes, then life would treat you well in return. You thought others would see your heart and respond with the same care. And for a while, maybe they did. But then something strange began to happen. Something hard to explain. Something that felt quiet but powerful, like a slow wind that keeps pushing until you forget what it felt like to stand still. You began to notice that people often took more than they gave. That your silence became the space where others grew louder. That the more you helped, the more they expected. And the more you gave, the less they seemed to appreciate it. It didn't feel like a fair exchange. It felt like something was off, but you couldn't say exactly what. So you did what you always do. You tried harder. You gave more. You blamed yourself. Maybe you weren't kind enough. Maybe you needed to be more patient, more understanding, more loving. Maybe, just maybe, this time it would be different. But it wasn't. And deep down, you began to feel something you didn't want to feel: resentment. It whispered that you were being used, that people liked you more for what you did than for who you are, that they weren't really seeing you. They were only seeing the version of you that made their lives easier. And this is where the truth begins to surface. The kindness you've been offering is real, but the world around you has not always been ready to receive it with the same care. And the reason why goes much deeper than selfishness or rudeness. It lives in something older, something buried in the way humans are wired to survive. Psychologists like Carl Jung spoke of what he called the shadow, a hidden part of each person's mind where we keep all the pieces of ourselves we don't want others to see. It holds our anger, our fears, our jealousy, and our hunger for control. And even when we try to be good and kind, that shadow is still there, influencing how we act, especially when we're afraid or insecure. Now imagine a person who has never looked at their own shadow, someone who is scared of being vulnerable, who hides their pain behind pride or power. When they see someone like you, open, gentle, willing to give, they don't always know how to handle it. Your kindness shines a light on the parts of them they've spent their whole life trying to hide. And light makes shadows uncomfortable. Friedrich Nietzsche once said that people fear truth not because it is false, but because it is too true. In the same way, people sometimes fear kindness, not because it is wrong, but because it touches something inside them that feels unfinished or broken. When you are deeply kind, you are also deeply honest. You carry warmth without asking for anything back. You offer peace without demanding attention. And that kind of presence can make others feel exposed, not on purpose, but because it reminds them of what they've forgotten in themselves. In a world full of masks, the person who shows up without one becomes unsettling. And that is where the danger begins. Because people don't always react with gratitude. Sometimes they react with fear. And when people are afraid, they often reach for control. Not because they want to hurt you, but because they don't want to feel helpless. Robert Greene, who spent years studying human behavior, power, and relationships, explains that people often respond to kindness with suspicion if they think there's no power behind it. To them, strength is what keeps you safe. Power is what earns respect. And when you lead with warmth alone, without clear boundaries or self-protection, they don't always feel trust. They feel opportunity. That's hard to hear, especially if your kindness comes from a place of love. But it's important, because once you understand this, you can stop blaming yourself. You can stop asking why they treated you that way, and start seeing the pattern for what it really is. There is nothing wrong with your heart, but there may be something missing in how you protect it. And here is where the deeper pain takes root. If you've always been kind, especially from a young age, it may have been your way of staying safe. Maybe you grew up in a home where love was uncertain, where conflict made the air feel sharp, where being helpful made you feel worthy. Maybe your kindness wasn't just a choice. Maybe it was how you learned to survive. That's called fawning, a response to fear where we try to please in order to avoid harm. And many people who grow up needing to be good learn this without even knowing. It becomes second nature. You smile even when you're sad. You comfort others even when you're the one breaking. You make yourself small so that no one else has to feel uncomfortable. But every time you do that, something inside you grows quiet. And eventually, the world no longer hears your real voice. They only hear the version of you that they've grown used to. The version that doesn't ask for anything. The version that says, "I'm fine," even when you're not. That's the cost of unguarded kindness in a world that confuses gentleness with weakness. And that's why the people who hurt you didn't stop. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't see the line they were crossing. Because you never drew it. It's not your fault that the world misunderstood your heart, but it is your chance to understand it now, fully, completely, without shame. There is a reason you feel the way you do. There is a reason you've been hurt more times than you can count. And it's not because your kindness was wrong. It's because your kindness was left unprotected. And before you can begin to protect it, you must first see what happens when you don't. Because what's coming next is something you already know, deep down, beneath the silence and the self-doubt. You felt it in your chest, in your throat, in the space between what you give and what you get back. The world doesn't just hurt people who are kind. It forgets them, unless they remember themselves first. There's something strange about being kind for too long without being seen. At first, it feels like you're doing the right thing. You tell yourself that being patient is good, that giving second chances makes you strong, that putting others first means you care deeply. And maybe that's all true. But over time, something starts to change, quietly, slowly, and in ways you don't even notice at first. You begin to feel tired, even when you've done nothing physical. You start waking up with a heaviness that follows you through the day. It's not sadness exactly, and it's not anger either. It's more like something missing. A part of you that has gone quiet from being ignored for too long. You still smile. You still help. You still try to be the one others can count on. But deep inside, a quiet question keeps rising. When is someone going to show up for me? You try not to ask that out loud. You push it away. You remind yourself that it's selfish to want more. But the truth is, that question isn't selfish, it's human. Because every time you offer kindness without receiving any back, a small part of your heart begins to wonder if you matter. And this, right here, is one of the first hidden costs of kindness without balance. When you keep giving without boundaries, people start to expect it. Not because they're evil, but because they get used to the way you make things easy for them. You don't complain. You don't ask for much. You don't speak up when something feels off. So why would they think anything is wrong? What begins as kindness turns into silence. And that silence is where your needs go to disappear. The human brain is built to notice patterns. It learns what to expect from the people around us. So when you always say yes, people begin to assume you will always say yes. When you never show you're hurt, people assume you're not hurting. And when you never set a boundary, people assume you don't have any. But inside you do. You've just been taught to hide them. That's why it feels so lonely, even when you're surrounded by people. That's why it feels like no one really sees you. Not the real you. The one who sometimes feels confused, overwhelmed, or tired of carrying so much weight. When this happens again and again, something deeper begins to shift. Your sense of worth, which once felt solid, begins to depend on how much others need you. You begin to believe that your value comes from being helpful, that your place in someone's life is tied to your ability to make things easier for them. And the more you believe that, the harder it becomes to say no. The harder it becomes to ask for anything in return. The harder it becomes to take up space and simply say, I matter too. This is how a cycle begins. You give to feel valuable. You give to feel safe. And the more you give, the more people expect. But instead of feeling more loved, you start feeling more used. And when you feel used, you give even more, hoping that maybe this time, someone will notice the effort. Someone will stay. Someone will care the way you care. But they don't. And so the pattern continues. Over time, this kind of emotional exhaustion becomes something more. It seeps into your body. You feel tired even after resting. You lose interest in things you once enjoyed. You stop reaching out. You stop asking for anything at all. You shrink, not because someone told you to, but because it feels safer than being ignored. This is what trauma can look like when it comes dressed in kindness. You don't have bruises. You have boundaries that no longer exist. You don't have scars. You have silence where your voice should be. You don't cry in public. You explain everything away until even you start to believe it. And worst of all, you forget who you were before the world taught you to trade your truth for acceptance. This is what happens when kindness isn't balanced with strength. You stop trusting your feelings. You second-guess your instincts. You believe that conflict means failure. And you fear that if you ever stop being nice, no one would stay. But that fear comes from a place you didn't choose. It was taught to you. Maybe when you were young, you learned that love had to be earned. That asking for too much would push people away. That being easy to love meant staying quiet, staying small, and never making things too hard for anyone else. And even though you're older now, those lessons still live in your body. This is what many call a fawn response. It's what happens when your nervous system decides that the best way to stay safe is by pleasing others. It doesn't come from weakness. It comes from survival. From growing up in spaces where it wasn't always safe to be fully yourself. So when someone walks over your feelings, you smile instead of speaking up. When someone asks too much, you say yes because saying no feels dangerous. And when someone treats you like an afterthought, you try harder instead of walking away. And the people around you, they don't always know what's happening inside, because you've gotten so good at pretending. But pretending comes at a cost. The more you pretend to be okay, the less likely anyone is to notice you're not. And the longer you stay in that role, the more invisible your real self becomes. That's the deepest consequence of all. Not just being hurt by others, but slowly disconnecting from yourself. You begin to forget your own needs. You forget how to speak your truth. You forget what it feels like to be loved without having to earn it. But the truth is still there, buried under all the effort, buried under all the smiles and helpfulness and quiet tears. And when you finally begin to look at it, not with judgment, but with gentleness, you'll see something beautiful. You were never wrong to be kind, but you were never meant to give yourself away just to be loved. And once you see that clearly, you can begin to imagine a different way of living. A life where your kindness has edges, where your yes means something because your no is just as real, where people don't stay because you make things easy, but because they truly value who you are. You don't have to disappear to be good. You don't have to bleed to belong. You just have to remember that the love you give to others is something you deserve to keep for yourself too. At some point, something inside you says enough. It doesn't shout. It doesn't scream. It just speaks with a kind of steady knowing. like a soft bell ringing in the distance. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. You realize, maybe for the first time, that kindness doesn't mean you have to keep shrinking. That love doesn't mean you always have to stay quiet. That being a good person doesn't mean letting yourself be walked over again and again. This is the beginning of your rebellion. Not a loud rebellion, not a messy one, but a calm, steady turning inward. A quiet shift where you begin to ask a new question, not how do I keep others happy, but what makes me feel whole. You start by noticing all the small ways you've been disappearing. The conversations where you held your tongue. The days you said yes when your whole body wanted to say no. The times you gave comfort to others, even when you were the one falling apart. And you begin to understand that real kindness, strong, steady, grounded kindness, starts from within. It doesn't begin with doing more for others. It begins with doing less of what hurts you. That may sound simple, but it isn't easy. Because walking away from the role you've played your whole life feels strange at first. You might worry that people will think you've changed, that they'll be upset when you say no, or confused when you stop over-explaining your every choice. And they might be. Some will notice the shift, some won't like it, and some might walk away. But that's not something to fear. It's something to trust. Because the people who leave when you stop pleasing them were never really choosing you. They were choosing your silence. They were choosing the parts of you that made life easier for them. And when you stop offering those parts for free, you'll see who's left standing. This is not about becoming cold. It's not about turning your back on love. It's not about making the world a harder place. It's about protecting the warmth inside you so that it doesn't burn out. Robert Greene once wrote that when you appear too generous, people begin to expect it. When you give too much, they stop valuing the gift. And when you never say no, they never stop asking. This doesn't mean you should stop being generous, but it means your generosity should have roots, not in fear, but in freedom, not in habit, but in choice. So you begin to change the way you move through the world. You start with small things. You pause before saying yes. You breathe before responding. You let yourself feel the full truth of your emotions instead of brushing them away. You ask yourself, not what others want, but what you truly need. And then you act on it, not with anger, not with guilt, but with clarity. You cancel plans when you're too tired. You speak honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. You take time for yourself, not just as a reward, but as a right. And the more you do this, the more something incredible begins to happen. You begin to feel stronger, not the kind of strong that needs to prove anything, not the kind that pushes people away, but the kind that stands tall, steady, and rooted in truth. You no longer give because you're afraid to lose someone. You give because it feels good, and only when it does. You no longer avoid conflict at all costs. You learn to face it when necessary, without fear, because you know your voice matters too. You no longer measure your worth by how much you do for others. You begin to understand that your worth was never something you had to earn in the first place. And in this new way of living, something else begins to shift. Your relationships start to change. Some grow stronger. The people who truly love you, who see your heart and respect your boundaries, start to show up in deeper ways. They may even tell you, I feel like I'm finally seeing the real you. Others fade away. And though it hurts at first, you know now that this is not a loss. It's a clearing, a gentle opening for better things to come. You no longer carry everyone else's burdens just to feel close to them. You learn that closeness built on sacrifice is not love. It's fear dressed as devotion. And you finally begin to see the truth, that protecting your peace is not selfish. That saying no is not cruel. That being kind to yourself is not something extra. It's something essential. You may even find yourself feeling joy again. Not the kind of joy that depends on someone else's reaction, but a quiet joy, a peaceful kind. The kind that comes when you're not trying so hard to be good, but simply allowing yourself to be whole. You don't have to become someone else to be free. You just have to stop hiding the parts of yourself you were told were too much, too loud, too sensitive, or too complicated. Because the truth is, you are not too much. You are just enough. And your kindness is no longer something that gets you hurt. It is something you protect, something you offer with intention, and something that flows from a heart that no longer needs to be emptied in order to be loved. This is your rebellion, not against people, but against the idea that you have to be small to be safe. Not against kindness, but against the belief that kindness must come at the cost of yourself. You are rewriting the rules. And as you step into this new chapter, you carry something stronger than ever before. Not a harder heart, not a sharper tongue, but a deeper self-respect. And from that place, your kindness becomes powerful, not because it's louder, but because it's finally yours. There comes a moment when you finally stop trying to prove anything. You stop bending your voice to fit someone else's comfort. You stop holding back tears because you think they make you look weak. You stop trying to be agreeable just to be accepted. And in that moment, something powerful begins to rise inside you. Something steady, quiet, and real. It's not pride. It's not defiance. It's peace. You have spent so long trying to be good. You've worked so hard to stay kind, to show up, to be thoughtful, to forgive easily, to make life easier for others. And for a while, maybe that helped you feel safe. Maybe that helped you feel wanted. Maybe that helped you survive. But now you see the truth. You don't need to be smaller to be loved. You don't need to be perfect to belong. You don't need to carry everyone else's pain just to keep them close. All you ever needed was permission to be whole. And that permission comes from you. You may have thought for a long time that if you stopped being nice, people would leave. And maybe some of them did. Maybe some people got uncomfortable when you started speaking up, when you stopped giving so much without asking for anything in return. But now, you're learning that their discomfort was never your burden to carry. Because real love doesn't shrink you. Real love honors your truth. And once you begin living from that truth, something else becomes clear. You were never too kind. You were never too sensitive. You were never too emotional. You were simply giving away parts of yourself to people who didn't know how to care for them. And it wasn't your job to teach them. It was your job to care for you. You've seen now that not everyone who smiles has your best interest at heart. You've learned that charm isn't the same as love, that attention isn't the same as respect, and that being needed is not the same as being valued. And so you stop chasing. You stop begging to be seen. You stop explaining your heart to people who are not listening. And you begin to build a life where your kindness is not something that costs you your voice, your rest, or your joy. You begin to protect it, not by locking it away, but by placing it in the right hands. And that starts with your own. Robert Greene teaches that power is not just about controlling others. It's about understanding yourself so well that you no longer hand over your peace for approval. It's about choosing how and where to use your energy, instead of letting the world drain it from you. That's what real strength looks like. It's not loud. It's not aggressive. It doesn't need to prove anything. It just is. And when you live from that place, when you are kind because it feels honest, not because it feels safe, you begin to notice that your relationships change. The people who stay are the ones who respect your edges, the ones who listen when you speak, the ones who don't just love the version of you that gives, but love the version that needs to. You begin to draw new boundaries, not out of anger, but out of love for yourself. You say no without guilt. You rest without shame. You speak your truth without apology. And from this place, your heart begins to breathe again. Not everything will be perfect. There will still be moments when old fears rise up, when you wonder if you're being selfish or if you're asking for too much. But now you know how to sit with those feelings instead of running from them. Now you know how to stay present with your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Because now you know something that can never be taken from you. You are worthy of love that doesn't require you to suffer. You are worthy of peace that doesn't demand you stay silent. You are worthy of a life where you no longer feel invisible. And the more you live from this truth, the more it shows up in your world, in your friendships, your choices, your voice, your stillness. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-giving. You stop pouring from a cup that's been empty for years. And you start living as someone who is no longer afraid of taking up space. That's what the final truth is. Kindness was never the enemy. It was the misunderstanding of kindness that hurt you. The belief that kindness meant never saying no. The idea that love meant always saying yes. The lie that you had to earn your worth by giving parts of yourself away. But now, you know better. You know that real kindness begins with truth. That real love includes your voice. That real strength looks like softness wrapped in self-respect. And the people who see you now, who see the fullness of who you are, see someone different than before. They see someone who doesn't need to be needed. They see someone who gives without losing. They see someone who has walked through fire and come out glowing. So you keep walking, not because you're running from the past, but because you're moving towards something more honest. You're moving toward a life that doesn't just look peaceful, but feels peaceful. A life where your heart can stay open without being broken. A life where your kindness has edges and your soul has space to breathe. And in that life, you are no longer the one who gets hurt for being kind. You are the one who teaches the world what real kindness looks like. Kindness with strength, kindness with truth, kindness that stands tall. This is your story now. A story not of pain, but of power. A story where the most beautiful parts of you are no longer hidden. A story where your kindness becomes a quiet kind of freedom. And it begins every time you say to yourself, with steady grace, I do not have to disappear to be loved. I only have to be real. And you are.